When you are starting out with Ostriv, it can be a pretty daunting task to manage your food, as there is a big food variety to choose from and also complex structures of how to distribute the food to the people of your town. So with this video, I'm going to give you some tips and pointers on what you can do to improve your food distribution and also to make your food production more effective. Right at the beginning of the game, you are required to build 9 village houses. Now what I would suggest is that you build the village houses with the gardens. Also additionally to that is that you make the plot sizes a little bit bigger using the F1 key. Now when you make these plot sizes a little bit bigger, it gives you a higher yield of whatever vegetables that you plant within those gardens. Now you want to also make sure that you build the initial houses not too far from the camping spot that you start at, because there's a lot of building tools that's at the camping site, and so when there's a shorter distance obviously from where you construct the buildings to the camping spot, then they will build the houses quicker. Now you do want to set up the houses as quick as you can so that you'll have at least 3 houses that will already be able to plant seeds for the first year that you have your town established. So you quickly go through the seasons, but I've found that if I do build quick enough, I can get at least 3 of my houses up to produce crops within the first year. After playing many hours within Ostriv, I realized that there are 3 different vegetables that gives a very high yield within the yards that you get for your village houses, and that is peas, garlic and onions. Now what I would suggest is, once you've got your granary set up, is to slot in the peas, the garlic and the onions as the first 3 foods available to your people in the village. It's pretty much a guarantee that you're going to get either all 3 of them in a very high yield, or at least one of the 3 in a high yield. But year after year you do get a big amount of all 3 of these items, so that's generally my first go-to of foods that are set available in the marketplace for the villagers. Once you get to the level of when you can place your farm, I would advise you or recommend that you make your crop fields in between the size of 30 by 30 and 40 by 40. Now there are 2 reasons why I would recommend to make the crop fields this size. Now the first thing is that if it's not too big, the crop fields, it will give you more space to have a bigger variety of crops, which is important, and I'll address that soon. Also additionally to that is it's quite labor intensive, so you require a lot of workers to harvest and to plant all the crops. So if you make the crop fields too big, especially at the beginning stages of your game, then you're simply not going to be able to harvest all the crops, and you will just waste a whole bunch of resources. Now the crop fields can go up to the size of 50 by 50, but I would, like I say, advise you to just make it a little bit smaller so that you can and will be able to harvest all your crops. After you place your first farm, I would advise you to do a variety of 3 different crops, and I'll go through all the possibilities of what I believe is the best crops to start with. So the first thing is, you can either choose between buckwheat or potatoes. Now the reason why buckwheat and potatoes are a good crop to have initially is because you don't need any secondary production to distribute to the people. So in other words, as soon as the products comes off the field, you can immediately distribute that to your people. So that's why that's a really good one to have, either between those 2. Secondly, I would advise you to do sunflowers, because with the sunflowers you can do sunflower oil, and it's one of the best trading commodities that you can find within the game. Probably the best, because literally every town wants sunflower oil. Then thirdly, you want an item that can help you produce clothes. Now you can either choose between hemp or flax, but ultimately you're going to use one of those 2 to produce clothes, to avoid having pigs and chickens all together. Now the reason why I say you must avoid those 2 is because the pigs and the chickens, they actually consume your food that you could distribute to the people. So your food is consuming your food, and so it's kind of like defeating the purpose really. But if you have cows, sheep and horses, they feed on hay, and your people can't use the hay in any other way other than to provide it for those animals. So I would say, as a meat substitute, rather focus on getting the cows, the sheep and the horses, and that gives you a substantial amount of food in any case, and you don't dig into your other food reserves to get a new type of food source. When you do get to the level of placing orchards, assign the farm workers there to make dried fruit for you. Now you can make dried fruit with any fruits that you get from the orchards, and what's nice about the dried fruit is that it just lasts so much longer than the fresh fruits that you get from the farm, obviously. So there is a button that you can select on the orchards which will enable you to then start producing dried fruit, and then the dried fruit, obviously it's just going to be a much better thing for you to provide for the town. So if you do have an excess amount of food, then the dried fruit will just outlast the fresh fruit by far. Once your town becomes a lot bigger, you have a 3-to-1 ratio between the village houses with gardens and the row houses. So when your town gets bigger, you must not slow down in building your village houses with the plots. I know you are tempted to build less of those houses as it takes up a lot of space, but they do contribute greatly to your food production for your town. So just make sure to always keep around about a 3-to-1 ratio for every row house structure that you build, that you have at least 3 village houses with gardens, so that you can always sustain your food production for the city as a whole. Dried fish kind of works like in the same way that it would work for your dried fruit. So what you want to do is, once you've got your fishing hut up, you need to make sure that you've got a salt works somewhere. So on this map you can see I've got my salt works over here. So make sure that that is running smoothly, and once you're producing your first salt, you can go to the fishing dock, and then you can also see that there's an option that shows dried fish, and then you can move this bar up to 1,000. But basically what this means is that it will start producing dried fish over this amount. So currently it's set on 200. So as soon as we've achieved 200 fish, catching 200 fish, they will start to produce dried fish, and they can make up to 3 batches at a time. So they won't do any more dried fish until they completed the batch. But it works in the same way. The dried fish, in fact, is much better than the dried fruit, because there's no expiration on the dried fish, and you do have neighboring towns that will also trade with you for the dried fish. So it's kind of like a multi-purpose food. It feeds your people, it lasts long, and then also you can trade it with neighboring towns. That's it for me for today's tips, guys. I do hope that you did enjoy it. I know Ostriv can be a pretty complex game, especially when you start out with the game. It took me a lot of gaming hours to figure out the game, and I'm constantly learning stuff in the game still. But if you did enjoy these tips, please do remember to subscribe as well as press the bell notification button. Thank you so much for watching, and then I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.